It is 1944. A platoon of British soldiers crouches in the rubble of a bombed Italian village, their uniforms still thick with dust from the morning's bombardment. The air smells of cordite and burnt stone. Then comes the sound they've been dreading, the distant rumble of caterpillar tracks grinding against the road surface. A German Panther tank emerges from behind a collapsed church, its turret swiveling, searching for targets. The soldiers have perhaps 30 seconds before it reaches their position. There is no anti-tank gun, no friendly armor, nothing but their rifles and the man clutching a strange-looking tube across his lap, something that looks more like a piece of agricultural equipment than a weapon of war. As the tank advances, he shoulders this peculiar device, adjusts his aim, and squeezes the trigger. For one breathtaking moment, nothing happens. Then the device jolts backwards as if possessed by a violent ghost, and a projectile screams across 50 meters of open ground. The impact is catastrophic. The tank's track buckles and tears. The vehicle lurches to a halt, crippled. The soldiers have won their reprieve. They had just witnessed something remarkable, the extraordinary capabilities of the PIAT, the projector, infantry, anti-tank. It was a weapon that ought never to have worked, a desperate improvisation born from crisis and refined through innovation, yet it would fundamentally alter what a single soldier could achieve against armored warfare. By 1941, the situation facing British infantrymen was becoming increasingly desperate. The German Blitzkrieg had demonstrated with terrifying clarity that tanks were no longer supplementary weapons on the battlefield, they were dominant. Across North Africa, soldiers armed with nothing but rifles and hand grenades watched helplessly as German panzers and Italian tanks tore through their positions with brutal efficiency. Anti-tank rifles, such as the Boys gun, proved disappointingly ineffective against modern armor. Soldiers firing these cumbersome weapons would need to place shots with absolute precision at ranges where the tank commander could already see them and bring his machine guns or main armament to bear. Infantry units were being shredded. Tank losses were mounting, but soldier losses were mounting faster. The problem was tactical. How could an ordinary infantryman, armed with basic equipment and no specialist training, achieve an effective anti-tank capability? Existing solutions demanded heavy support weapons, trucks to carry them, teams to operate them. These were luxuries that small units advancing through broken terrain simply did not possess. The requirement was published in 1941. It asked for something almost impossible: a lightweight portable weapon that could penetrate modern tank armor, fired by a single soldier, compact enough to be carried by an assault squad, simple enough to be used by hastily trained personnel in combat conditions. The device needed to be inexpensive to manufacture, reliable in the field, and capable of being produced in substantial numbers on a timeline measured in months, not years. Several designs were submitted. Most were rejected as impractical. Then came a proposal from a small design team working at the Chemstrand plant in Waltham Abbey. Their chief engineer was a Canadian inventor named Ralph Shepard. The concept he proposed was revolutionary, and it was utterly unconventional. Instead of relying on explosive propulsion, gunpowder, Shepard's team designed a weapon that used a pre-compressed spring and a spring-driven hammer mechanism to fire a projectile. The PIAT operated on a principle so simple it bordered on primitive, yet so ingenious that it would remain in service with British forces for nearly 20 years. The weapon consisted of a barrel 100 centimeters long, mounted on a sturdy wooden stock not dissimilar to a rifle. Inside the barrel lay the beating heart of the system, a powerful coil spring that ran the full length of the weapon. At the breech end, a heavy firing pin was held under tremendous tension by this spring. When a soldier loaded a round, a hollow charge grenade approximately 12 centimeters in diameter and weighing around 3 kilograms, into the barrel and pulled the trigger, the firing mechanism released the compressed spring. The spring drove the firing pin forward with savage force, striking a percussion cap on the base of the projectile. This percussion cap ignited a small charge of propellant inside the grenade itself. The result was remarkably effective. The projectile shot down the barrel and out across the battlefield at a muzzle velocity of roughly 120 meters per second, considerably slower than a rifle bullet, but sufficient to deliver the warhead to its target with lethal force. The technical achievement lay in the warhead design. The PIAT fired a shaped charge grenade, a principle that had been developed in the 1930s but never before applied to an infantry weapon. The grenade's nose contained a conical metal liner surrounded by explosive compound. When the warhead struck armor, the explosive detonated, driving the metal liner backwards at tremendous velocity, a technique now known as the Monroe effect. This created a narrow jet of molten metal and superheated gas that could penetrate even thick tank armor. A PIAT round could defeat the frontal armor of a Panther tank, though this required either exceptional luck, exceptional skill, or the round striking at optimal angles. Against the more vulnerable side and rear armor, or against lighter vehicles, it was devastatingly effective. The manufacturing process was elegantly simple. The barrel was made from seamless steel tubing. The spring could be manufactured on standard industrial equipment. The warheads themselves were produced by pressing together copper, explosive, and steel components in factories across the English Midlands. Production began in October 1942. By December 1943, over 40,000 units had been manufactured. By war's end, production figures had climbed to well over 300,000, though exact numbers remain somewhat classified and estimates vary considerably. The weapon was not without its challenges. The spring required considerable force to cock. A soldier needed to physically lever the cocking handle to compress the spring for the next shot, a process that required genuine physical effort and, in the chaos of battle, was occasionally forgotten, resulting in misfires. The range was limited compared to conventional anti-tank weapons. The PIAT was genuinely effective at ranges up to perhaps 100 meters, with effective fire becoming increasingly difficult beyond this distance. The recoil, whilst not violent, was distinctive and somewhat painful against the shoulder. Yet these limitations were far outweighed by the weapon's advantages. It weighed only 3.2 kilograms, light enough for any soldier to carry. It required no external ammunition supply except for the grenades themselves. It could be fired from inside buildings, from vehicles, even from a recumbent position. It was robust, requiring minimal maintenance. And it worked reliably in conditions that would jam or malfunction less hardy weapons. If you are finding this fascinating, a quick subscribe really does help us continue bringing you these neglected stories from military history. Thank you. The operational record of the PIAT was substantial and frequently dramatic. British forces first used the weapon operationally in the Italian campaign in 1943. At Gela in Sicily, small anti-tank squads armed with Piats claimed several tank kills in the chaotic fighting that followed the invasion. In North Africa, where the weapon arrived too late to influence the decisive battles, it nonetheless proved its worth in smaller engagements throughout 1943 and 1944. The weapon's greatest theater of operation, however, was Northern Europe following the Normandy invasion. Airborne forces descending into Normandy on June 6, 1944, carried Piats with them. In the hedgerow fighting that characterized the Normandy campaign, the weapon proved invaluable. A PIAT team could engage a German tank without committing themselves to the lengthy process of deploying a heavier anti-tank gun. The weapon featured in countless small unit actions, often deciding the outcome of engagements at critical moments. British infantry advancing through France and into Belgium and Germany employed PIATs extensively. Officers consistently reported the weapon's worth in their after-action reports. The psychological impact upon German tank crews should not be underestimated. The knowledge that infantry could carry and deploy an effective anti-tank weapon caused German commanders to be considerably more cautious in committing their armor, particularly in congested, built-up terrain. The weapon influenced tactical doctrine, forcing a reconsideration of how armored formations should operate in close terrain. Exact casualty figures, both of tanks destroyed and of infantry armed with PIATs, remain incompletely documented, though estimates suggest several thousand German tanks across all theaters encountered PIAT rounds during the latter half of the Second World War. Comparing the PIAT with German equivalents reveals interesting contrasts. The Panzerfaust, the German response to the same tactical requirement, arrived later but represented a fundamentally different technological approach. Rather than using a spring mechanism, the Panzerfaust employed a simple rocket motor that propelled the warhead. The Panzerfaust was lighter, could engage targets at greater range, and was even simpler to manufacture, requiring minimal training to operate. Yet the Panzerfaust was single-use and could not be reloaded. The PIAT, by contrast, was designed as a multi-shot weapon from the outset. This fundamental difference shaped their operational employment. The Panzerfaust proliferated in the final desperate months of the war, provided in vast quantities to Hitler Youth units and local militia, but it fundamentally changed the nature of tank-infantry engagement. It made close-range fighting between tanks and infantry far more costly. The American equivalent, the bazooka, evolved throughout the war but operated on broadly similar principles to the Panzerfaust, using electrical ignition of a rocket motor. The bazooka required more training to operate effectively and was more prone to misfires in damp conditions, though it benefited from electrical reliability once the user mastered its systems. British forces frequently captured and reissued German Panzerfausts, particularly in 1945, recognizing their practical advantages in specific tactical situations. However, the PIAT remained the primary weapon because it was British, because supplies could be guaranteed, and because soldiers trained with it could achieve consistent results. Some military historians have argued the Panzerfaust represented superior technology for its time. Others maintain the PIAT's multi-shot capability gave it lasting operational advantages. The truth likely resides in the middle ground. Each weapon was optimized for different requirements and emerged from different industrial capabilities. The actual impact of the PIAT on the conduct of the Second World War remains debatable amongst military historians. The weapon certainly killed tanks, of that there is no question. The documented evidence of tank losses attributable to anti-tank weapons of various types is substantial. Yet tanks were not the primary victims of infantry weapons during the Second World War. Aircraft, artillery, and other tanks killed the vast majority of German tanks lost. What the PIAT genuinely achieved was a transformation in infantry confidence and tactical capability. Soldiers no longer felt completely helpless when facing armor. Anti-tank teams could be positioned and held in reserve, ready to engage targets of opportunity. Defensive lines became genuinely more formidable when equipped with PIAT teams. In the advance through occupied Europe, PIAT-armed squads could protect infantrymen advancing through open ground, discouraging German armored counterattacks. The weapon was rarely decisive in any single engagement, yet its cumulative effect across countless small actions shaped the character of fighting on the Western Front. Following the war, the PIAT remained in service with British forces throughout the 1950s and into the early 1960s. It was used during the Korean War, where it proved effective against the lighter Soviet tanks encountered in that conflict. British paratroopers in Malaya carried PIATs during counterinsurgency operations. The weapon seemed destined for permanence. Yet technological progress was inexorable. The introduction of truly portable guided anti-tank missiles in the 1960s, the Vigilant, subsequently the Milan, rendered the PIAT obsolete. Its lack of range and its requirement for precise targeting became liabilities. By 1968, the P-IAT had been withdrawn from service. Today, surviving examples can be seen in the Imperial War Museum, the Tank Museum at Bovington, and in various regimental museums across Britain. It remains, despite its obscurity, one of the most significant weapons in the British military arsenal of the Second World War. It is December 1944. The same village in Normandy. Snow lies thick on the rubble. German panzers have counterattacked, attempting to push the British forces back. As the lead tank clanks around a corner, its commander unaware of the danger ahead, a young lance corporal raises a P-IAT to his shoulder. He is frightened. These weapons always were unreliable in the cold. He squeezes the trigger. The percussion cap fires. The spring drives the pin. The warhead ignites. For a moment, it seems to fail. Then there is a brilliant flash and the shattering crack of shaped charge detonation. The tank's track separates and curls like a dying snake. The vehicle comes to a halt. The German crew scrambles from the hatches and runs for cover. The British soldiers press forward. The village is held. This is what the P-IAT achieved. Not grand strategic victory, not the transformation of entire campaigns, but the preservation of ordinary soldiers' lives in countless small corners of a vast war. It was a weapon born from desperation, refined through innovation, and deployed with great courage. It was revolutionary not because it introduced new physics, the shaped charge had existed before, but because it made anti-tank capability available to the infantry soldier, to the man in the trench, to the squad advancing through the rubble. After the war, military planners would move on to guided missiles and sophisticated systems. They would largely forget the P-IAT, consigning it to museums and history books. Yet the principle it embodied, that an individual soldier should be capable of engaging enemy armor, remains fundamental to infantry doctrine to this day. Every soldier carrying a modern Javelin missile system is, in a sense, operating from the same tactical principle that animated the P-IAT. That principle was proven in the frozen villages of Normandy and the burning towns of the Rhineland. The P-IAT proved it possible. In doing so, it changed infantry warfare forever. The device that looked more like agricultural equipment than a weapon had, by the simple force of engineering and necessity, fundamentally altered the relationship between infantrymen and tanks. When you understand that, when you appreciate what was at stake and what was achieved, you begin to understand why the P-IAT deserves to be remembered not as a forgotten weapon, but as one of the Second World War's genuine innovations, a quiet revolution in how wars are fought and how soldiers survive them.